Eldrick Tiger Woods. Joining Sheriff Villanueva is Lomita Station Captain James Powers and other members of executive command staff. Also joining us here today is LA County Fire Chief Daryl Osby. Now I would like to introduce the Sheriff of Los Angeles County, Alex Villanueva.
Thank you, Captain Mendoza. Today at 7:12 in the morning, Lomita Sheriff Station received a call of a solo vehicle collision in Harbor or Hawthorne Boulevard, north of Palos Verdes Drive. We arrived on scene at 7:18 a.m. and discovered the solo vehicle collision, and the sole occupant was, again, Tiger Woods. And deputies, at the time, they did not see any evidence of impairment, anything that of concern. Obviously, the life-saving measures that had to be taken for the occupant of the vehicle, and Chief Osby will speak to that regard. And it was a solo vehicle. Unfortunately, during the course of the investigation of this, there was another traffic collision that happened with people being looky-loos. But that, thankfully, there was no injuries associated with that. The vehicle traveled several hundred feet from the center divider at the intersection and rested on the west side of the road in the brush. Sustained major damage to the vehicle. You've seen all the images of that. And with that, our Lomita Sheriff Station will be conducting the traffic investigation, and it'll take from days to several weeks to get the whole thing together. Once the investigation is completed, we will provide a detailed report. It'll be available, based on Public Record Act request, and we will not discuss it any further after that point. But at this point, I want to introduce Chief Daryl Osby, LA County Fire Department.
Good afternoon. I'm Fire Chief Daryl Osby of the Los Angeles County Fire Department. At approximately 7:22 this morning, resources from Los Angeles County Fire Station 106 received a report of a solo vehicle accident at the intersection of Hawthorne Boulevard and Palos Verdes Drive North in Rolling Hills Estates. Upon arrival of the scene of the incident with sheriffs on scene, resources and personnel from the Los Angeles County Fire Department observed a single rollover vehicle incident with one person trapped. The person trapped was extricated by the Los Angeles County Fire Department personnel. Earlier, it was stated that the jaws of life was utilized to extricate the person trapped. It was later determined by our personnel that a Halligan tube, which is used for prying, and an axe was also used to pry the person free from the vehicle. The person was packaged at the incident in stable condition with serious injuries, and because of the fact that they needed to be extricated, they were transported to Harbor UCLA Hospital because of the extrication, and Harbor Hospital is also a trauma center. As indicated earlier, there's also a second vehicle accident with no injuries. Thank you.
And the vehicle involved is a 2021 Genesis. It's a mid-size SUV. Para español, a las 7:12 de la mañana en la calle Hawthorne, rumbo al norte, por la intersección de Palos Verdes Drive, hubo un accidente automovilístico de un solo vehículo donde el vehículo volcó varias veces y cayó a las orillas del lado oeste de esa intersección. Y el ocupante era el golfista Tiger Woods y fue removido del vehículo y entonces fue transportado por los bomberos al Hospital General en Harbor. Y eso es lo que tenemos en español. No hay evidencia que hubo algún impedimento o embriaguez de alguna forma, y la investigación se va a ser hecho por aquí por los detectives que investigan los accidentes de tráfico, y ellos van a tener un reporte entre unos días a unas semanas, a hacer el reporte completo, y va a estar disponible después que eso se acabe. So let me switch now to Q&A, English or Spanish.
Chief Osby, if we could start with you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Sorry. Could you explain a little bit more? You were talking about the impairment. If there was no
Well, if the deputies arrive on scene, there's a vehicle that's rolled over. There's someone inside the vehicle. They can't remove them. Obviously, that's.
Was he unconscious or conscious?
We'll leave it at that. He was alive and he was conscious, and that's the extent of that.
What about the evidence of the impairment? You said there was no evidence.
There was no evidence of impairment. So subsequent to that, we're not going to make any. There was no effort to draw blood, for example, at the hospital.
Nothing was removed from the scene or found at the scene.
No evidence of impairment at this point in time. But I'll let Chief Osby.
Chief Osby,
Good morning.
was Tiger Woods conscious when you got there? Did he say anything to the paramedics who arrived? And can you tell us a little bit more, if we didn't use the jaws of life, how exactly did that extrication process take place?
Okay, the information I got back from my personnel and the things that they do is they would do a scene assessment. It was brought to my attention that he was conscious. Now, exactly what was said is unknown, but he was conscious. Our personnel make an assessment to make a determination of their level of consciousness, make sure that they're breathing, control any serious bleeding, and then control and address any serious injuries. It was brought to my attention that he had serious leg injuries, and that was assessed at the incident. The jaws of life are used as part of a package to extricate people that are trapped in vehicles. But it was later determined and brought to the attention that the jaws of life were not used to extricate Tiger Woods. We used a Halligan tool, which is a tool used for prying, and we also used an axe to pry him from the vehicle. He was taken from the vehicle with a collar and backboard for spinal precautions. He was had the proper splints. Because of the nature of the incident being a solar vehicle rollover and the fact that it required an extrication that met trauma center criteria, the nearest trauma center to the area is Harbor UCLA Hospital, where he was transported in serious but stable condition.
Which leg?
That I do not know. It was my understanding that he had serious injuries to both legs.
Both legs. Chief, this was his decision to go to Harbor UCLA, or you took him to the closest emergency room. Given his condition at the time, was it that severe? That's what you had to do?
The determination of where to be transported was made by the paramedics and the captain unseen. The reason that Tiger Woods was transported to Harbor UCLA Hospital is because it's a trauma center criteria. Because of the nature of the incident, it was a solo roller vehicle and the damage to the vehicle, and then it also required him to be extricated. That's one of the criteria that meets trauma center criteria. Therefore, he was transported to the nearest trauma center, which is Harbor UCLA Hospital.
Was he airlifted, and can you tell us if he had injuries anywhere other than his legs, and were any of those injuries critical?
It was he was not airlifted. There were no other life endangering injuries to my knowledge.
Sheriff, in a way of a question, if you would. I know it's a little early. The investigators haven't done all their stuff on that, but any indication of the speed at the time that the vehicle lost control over the center divider? All the reporters here have talked to neighbors saying you're going down that hill, you take your foot off the brakes, you're at 50 plus before you know it. Any indication how fast that vehicle may have been going at the time it flipped?
Well, at the time it crossed the center divider to the point that it rested was several hundred feet away. So obviously that indicates they were going at a greater speed than normal. However, because it is downhill, it slopes, and it curves. That area has a high frequency of accidents. It's not uncommon.
Any skid marks or anything indicating that he tried to brake or stop?
No skid marks, no braking. So apparently the first contact was with the center median, and from there then crossed into the opposing lane of traffic, hit the curb, hit a tree, and there was several rollovers during that process.
They haven't given you any kind of a preliminary indication in excess of 45, 50, 55 miles an hour?
That they're going to have to figure that one out. That's why the traffic investigators make the big bucks that they make.
Sheriff, what can you tell us about his condition now? Are you still in touch with Mr. Woods' team?
We've reached out. We've been in touch with his manager, and they do not want to release anything on his condition right now.
We hear that he's out of surgery and perhaps been moved to his own room, Sheriff?
All we know that a serious condition as a result of the accident, and that's about all they want to say.
You looking at weather as a factor in this accident, Sheriff Villanueva?
Weather is not a factor.
Get him out of the car. How long was that process?
Well, we arrived on scene at 7:18. They were notified within 4 minutes, and
We got the call from the Sheriff Department at approximately 7:22 this morning. Our resources arrived on scene at approximately 7:28. I don't have the information right now in relation to how long it took to extricate him from the vehicle.
Do you have any indication if there were drugs or medications involved? Why he was living that way?
No.
Who called it in? Did someone call 911, a bystander? And is there any indication that was sleeping?
we had a neighbor called 911. That's how the call was received at the station.
And you said no impairment. Did he fall? Is it possible he fell asleep at the wheel?
No evidence of impairment this time. That'll be subject to the investigation.
You say no evidence of impairment. What impairments are you looking for?
Well, we're looking at signs of under the influence of either narcotics, medication, alcohol, odor of alcohol, all these different things that would give you an idea in their behavior, but there was none present.
And in medical episodes appear he could have fallen asleep, had a heart attack, something.
That now we're going beyond what we have at the time, so that'll take the investigators will have to figure that one out.
I understand some vehicles now have essentially a black box that records certain information about how fast the car is going, did airbags deploy, telemetry, that sort of thing. Did this vehicle have that? Will you get information from that in the investigation?
The investigators will be able to, if they have it, they'll be able to have that and download it, and that will give us a good idea.
Was any of Tiger's team following the vehicle? Was this him solo?
Not that we're aware of.
Sheriff, you said that he was conscious, actually. Was he able to communicate how much pain he was in, whether or not, was he able to communicate at all?
He was able to communicate, and he was conscious. I'll leave it at that.
Villanueva, usted ya lo mencionó en inglés, ¿podría describirnos cómo fueron las circunstancias del accidente y mencionando la velocidad considerable a la que iba?
La velocidad no sabemos cuánto es, pero era considerable según el punto de partida de donde cruzó la parte mediana de la calle y donde cayó al otro lado eran varios cientos de pies. Y obviamente eso es una velocidad acelerante que se necesita para cubrir esa distancia.
Dijo que golpeó la curva y luego...
Hay una curva y está cuesta abajo a la misma vez.
Sheriff, do you know how long he was in the car before 911 arrived? Did he say at all how long he'd been waiting?
Well, we got the call at 7:12, and that came from the neighbors, so we have to assume they made that call almost immediately as soon as it happened because the neighbors, they're sitting right within 50 feet of the location. So
So they saw the crash happen.
if they didn't see it, they heard it because it's literally happened right at their doorstep.
This is a courtesy car that he was driving, a Genesis courtesy car, correct?
That is correct.
And is it possible that Mr. Woods was on the phone when this accident occurred? Or is this one of the factors that we're going to be considering?
That's something we'll have to explore. The investigators will have to ascertain that if it was distracted driving.
Osby, can you describe how the axe and the special tool were used to extricate him from the vehicle? I mean, as far as the doors go, I mean, how were the tools used for this process?
As it pertains to the vehicle, as articulated earlier, it was a rollover accident, and so Tiger Woods was trapped inside the vehicle. So our firefighters and our firefighter paramedics used the pry bar, they call it Halligan tool, and an axe to pry parts of the vehicle away from him, so they were able to safely extricate him from the vehicle.
At what point did he realize it was Tiger Woods? Did he identify himself? Did they check his license? How did you know who it was?
They recognized him, and he identified himself as well.
Sheriff, did you say no blood was drawn at the scene from Tiger?
No, we don't have that capability, nor do we want it.
Sheriff Villanueva, the accident crime scene has taken a long time. It's been there now for several hours. Just moving the car now. Is there a reason so much time has been taken at this crime scene? Are there certain factors you're looking at? Are there certain pieces of evidence you're hoping to find? Or is it simply the fact that this is Tiger Woods and this is the way we're going to handle it?
Well, any serious accident of this nature is going to take time. It usually takes hours, and removing the vehicle is one of the last steps. And they've done all their markers, taken all their measurements, gathered up all the stuff, and then 3 or 4 hours is pretty normal, actually.
The celebrity component is not playing a factor.
I don't think that'll play a factor in it.
Were the neighbors approaching him, like checking on his well-being? Did they like make it to the site and actually make contact with him?
No, they did not. No, there's a bluff. They're sitting about 20 feet above the place where the vehicle came to arrest.
Hey, Sheriff, can you talk a little bit about if he was able to stand after he was taken out? Was he able to take a couple of steps? Can you talk a little bit about what that looked
He was not able to get up. No, that was not an option.
Did Tiger Woods ask you to contact anyone for him? Did he ask you to contact a specific member of his family or a specific member of his team that was here for the golf tournament at this point?
At the hospital, he did, but not at the scene.
I'm sorry, sir. Can you clarify?
He did at the hospital, but not at the scene.
He asked you to contact
Yes.
a member of his family.
Who was it? Oh, a member of his team.
Thank you.
Huh?
Can you talk about the conditions inside the car? Was it trapped? Was he able to move at all?
Well, the interior of the cabinet of the vehicle was more or less intact. The front end was totally destroyed. The bumpers, everything was destroyed. Airbags deployed, all of that. And however, thankfully, the interior was more or less intact, which kind of gave him the cushion to survive what's otherwise would have been a fatal crash.
Hablaban ustedes de que hubo otro pequeño accidente después que no fue mayor.
Sí.
Platicaban también los vecinos del área de que en esa bajada hay coches que pierden control, que no son conocidos del área, gente ajena.
Eso es muy cierto, porque si uno no está pendiente y está con el teléfono o esas condiciones hace que esto ocurra con más frecuencia de lo normal, en ese lugar en particular, por la bajada y por la curva.
El accidente no hubo heridos, el segundo accidente.
No, no hubo.
Seatbelt, or did he give any indication of where he was coming from or heading to?
Well, he was definitely was heading northbound on Hawthorne. Yes.
Jefe Villanueva, ¿podría describir en español las condiciones en las que encontraron el vehículo?
El vehículo estaba destrozado por el exterior, pero el interior, la cabina estaba más o menos intacto y eso permitió que él sobreviviera ese accidente horrífico.
¿Puede decirnos si tenía las piernas quebradas o algo?
Tenía heridas en las dos piernas y heridas serias, pero no puedo decir más que eso.
¿Cuál es la razón que me están operando?
Eso es pregunta para los médicos. How's that? That he actually struck the first one going northbound, and that was on the center median. That was one of the first thing that he made contact with.
I know you said he was going northbound. Do we know where he was coming from at the time?
Not to my knowledge. No.
There's some reports that he was seen speeding earlier in the day. Have you heard those, and will you be conducting any other interviews following up on those?
That'll be up to the traffic investigators and the relevancy.
Any more questions?
Sheriff, can you say that speed was a factor in this?
Well, like every accident in that area, when it's downhill on a curve, you know, the speed, the vehicle code 22350 says unsafe speed for driving conditions. Typically on an accident, when it's a factor, that is one of the sections that is cited. And sometimes just because that's the posted speed limit, if there's a wet road, for example, that doesn't mean your speed limit is fixed there. You actually have to slow down even lower than that for the conditions of the road. So downhill on a curve is something that it's a lesson for everyone. You got to be aware of this.
The speed is a factor. And then if you could, can you just kind of paint the picture for us again? Because I know you answered the question, but just some clarity. He's coming down off of a hill. Speed, we think, is a factor. What's the first thing he hits when he loses control and goes over the wall? Can you kind of walk us through the sequence of events there?
From what I understand, the first thing was when he made contact with the center median, it would be the welcome to Rolling Hills Estate sign.
Sheriff, you took
He hits is the sign.
And that's in the center median. There's actually two signs. He hit the first one, the southernmost of those two signs, and then he winds up going across southbound lanes into the brush on the other side.
He hits a tree, is that correct?
Yes, there's a tree about 8-inch stump, and that one was sheared.
Sheriff, you talked about the fact that he communicated to you. Can you describe to us his pain threshold at the time? This is a man who has to be rushed into surgery today, and his legs are damaged. Was he in shock? Was he in tears? Was he in excruciating pain? How can you describe his reaction to those who first go?
I would leave that up to Chief Osby on that one.
Generic question.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Once again, Daryl Osby, Fire Chief, Los Angeles County Fire Department. I can't respond to the specifics of Tiger Woods. I mean, some of those questions are personal and need to be released from him or whomever's representing him. The only thing I can tell you from my experience of working in public safety for the past almost 4 decades, that anytime you're involved in a single vehicle accident like this with rollover and that level of damage and broken legs and lacerations that you're going to be in severe pain.
What was your concern then, Chief, when he was injured and you're transporting him? How concerned were those paramedics to get him to the hospital in a certain amount of time?
The fact of the matter is that he was a serious condition, but he was stable enough to transport to a trauma center. If the injuries are more dramatic and they couldn't control an airway, then they would have transported him to the nearest facility. But the fact that he was stable enough to be transported to a hospital farther away, which was the most appropriate hospital to be transported for because of the nature of the injuries, the nature of the incident says that it was a very serious injury. He met trauma center criteria, but he wasn't so serious that he needed to be transported to the nearest hospital for immediate life-saving procedures.
Chief, there's an LA County fire captain who says that he was able to stand as they assisted him out of the vehicle. Is there any truth to this idea that he was able to stand?
I cannot respond to that statement. I don't know.
I will,
Chief, just to clarify, is he still at that same trauma center now, or is he been placed with anywhere else?
It's my understanding that he's still at the Harbor UCLA Hospital, and no statement has been allowed for release yet, to be released yet.
actually, before, Deputy Gonzalez was actually the first deputy on scene, so he can perhaps clarify some of the questions that you may have. Go ahead, Deputy.
Good afternoon. I'm Deputy Gonzalez. I'm assigned to Lomita Sheriff Station. I'm the handling Deputy Carlos Gonzalez. I was the first unit on scene, and I'm the handling deputy for this current traffic collision.
Deputy Gonzalez, could you speak to that question? There's an LA County fire captain who says that Tiger Woods was able to stand as they assisted him out of the vehicle. Is there any truth to the idea that he was able to stand?
Unfortunately, Mr. Woods was not able to stand under his own power. Our partners at LA County Fire were able to extricate him from the vehicle, and they put him onto a backboard. When I arrived on the scene, Mr. Woods was seated in the driver's seat. I made contact with him, and I ensured that he was able to speak to me. At that time, he seemed that as though he was still calm and lucid. I made the determination that it would be safer to wait for LA County Fire to help remove him instead of trying to remove him myself. I kept Mr. Woods calm until LA County Fire arrived on scene.
What did you do to keep him calm, Deputy?
I spoke to him. I asked.
Conversation. Can you share it with us, please?
I asked him what his name was. He told me his name was Tiger, and at that moment I immediately recognized him. I asked him if he knew where he was, what time of day, just to make sure he was oriented. He seemed as though he was lucid and calm.
Was he concerned about his injuries?
He didn't seem concerned of his injuries at the time, which is not uncommon in traffic collisions. Many times people tend to be in shock. It's a traumatic experience. So it's not uncommon for people to be focused on unimportant things, or even if they are in pain, they might not feel it until much later.
Was the incident caught on your body cam?
Yes, my body camera was used per department policy.
Deputy, in the photos of the airbags, there's blood. We're trying to figure out everything that we're seeing. Did you see any injuries on anywhere other than the legs as you were just assessing him on site?
I did observe injuries. I can't speak as to the nature of the injuries. I'm not a trained medical professional, so I can't speak to that. What I can say is that he was injured, and he was successfully removed and taken to the hospital.
And you saw that he had a seatbelt on?
He was wearing a seatbelt.
Did he have lacerations as well as the leggings?
If he did, I was not able to see them due to his clothing.
You've seen a lot of car accidents. Do you think this type of car saved his life, or do you think like a cheaper car, like he wouldn't have had to get a...
As mentioned by the sheriff, that specific stretch of roadway is one of our trouble spots. Our locals in Rancho Palos Verdes and Rolling Hills Estates know that it's a hot spot for traffic collisions as well as speed. In my experience as a deputy who is traffic trained and works a traffic car, I have seen many collisions. The nature of his vehicle, the fact that he was wearing a seatbelt, I would say that it greatly increased the likelihood that it saved his life.
Is this the worst accident you've seen on that stretch?
I will say no, because I've been doing this for a while and I've seen fatal traffic collisions. So I will say that it's very fortunate that Mr. Woods was able to come out of this alive.
Deputy Gonzalez, this is an accident-prone stretch, correct? We've seen a number of accidents on this specific stretch. Is that correct?
This stretch of roadway is downhill, it's sweeping. Speeds there, the speed limit is 45 miles per hour. Myself, when I'm doing speed enforcement, I will sometimes catch people going 80 plus miles per hour. So it's more of a thing that you know, people see a nice stretch of road and maybe they're not watching their speedometer, or you know, maybe they're in a hurry.
During your conversations with Tiger, were you ever concerned in the time that you spent with him that of his pain threshold, or that he was going to lose consciousness at all?
At the moment that I spoke to Mr. Woods, I was able to determine that it would have been safer for me to wait for LA County Fire because his condition seemed stable, and I did not want to risk further injuring him by trying to remove him myself.
There was something floating around about like a bystander who went in and helped extricate him. So can you tell if there's any proof of that?
So the neighbor that lives behind heard the collision and came down and was the one that directed me to the vehicle. As was indicated by the sheriff, there was another unrelated traffic collision that occurred several feet down the roadway, which I believe was due to people trying to look. And that also kind of distracted from what was occurring, because he was several feet off the roadway, so I think most of the attention that people were focused on was on the roadway.
One more question.
Deputy, can you describe what the scene looked like inside the car? Did he have enough space to move around, wiggle around, and how did the passenger side look, and how did the back?
As indicated by the sheriff, the interior passenger compartment of the vehicle was intact. The airbags did deploy successfully. Again, he was wearing his seatbelt. I think this also kind of speaks to the marvel of modern automobiles, in that they're much safer than they've ever been previously.
Deputy, any idea how many times the vehicle flipped?
We don't know that at this time. Sí.
¿Tiene preguntas en español?
Sí, ¿cuál es la pregunta? Sí, cuando llegué, me fijé adentro del vehículo y le pregunté al señor cuál era su nombre para ver si podía platicar conmigo. Me dijo su nombre, es cuando lo reconocí. En ese tiempo hice la decisión que sería la mejor decisión de esperar a los bomberos llegar para poder sacarlo del vehículo, porque en ese tiempo sus heridas no se veían tan serios que se me hizo tan importante para sacarlo en ese momento y arriesgar posiblemente dañarlo más.
Mencionó que algunas personas estaban diciendo que se había podido estar de pie, lo cual usted dijo que era totalmente falso.
No, cuando lo sacaron los bomberos, lo pusieron en un stretcher y así se lo llevaron.
Entonces, ¿sí portaba el cinturón de seguridad?
Sí tuvo puesto el cinturón de seguridad.
Were there security cameras in the area?
Español, por favor, español.
¿Alguna herida en la cabeza?
Eso no sé, no soy doctor ni soy profesional médico, entonces no puedo hablar sobre sus heridas.
Pero tú que lo viste, tenía sangre en la cara, tal vez.
De eso no puedo hablar.
Lo que sí mencionabas es que era común en esa área que la velocidad, muchas veces las personas no se dieran cuenta que tan rápido iba.
Es una zona que es muy común ver carros que van en exceso de velocidad.
Thank you all for coming. This concludes our press conference.